Yeah, good to go.
Cool. Hi everyone. So tonight I'm going to talk about Hapi versus Express. And actually, before I do that, tonight the food and drink were provided by Walmart. They, as my employer, they've agreed to sort of help sponsor this event, so they give me a little stipend every month for this. So that's where the food came from. If you're wondering what happened to Chipotle, they don't give me that much money. Am I hearing
Yourself.
Oh, sounds terrible. So anyway, I had to bail on Chipotle because it's too expensive.
You want to give it like. I muted it. It'll stop shortly. Right about there.
Okay, there we go. All right, now we're good. Yeah, so so tonight I'm going to talk about Hapi versus Express, and if you're wondering what possible qualifications I have to do such a thing, ordinarily I would say I have none whatsoever. But on this topic specifically, I kind of am sort of qualified. I've used Express professionally for about 2 years at my previous job, and I use Hapi at my current job for almost about a similar amount of time. I'm also what's known as a core contributor to Hapi, so I sort of know it pretty well. So I kind of have a unique insight. I don't even like saying that, but that's sort of what it is. So again, I'm Adam Bretz. I'm one of the meetup organizers for the local Node Pittsburgh meetup. This is sort of like a cross-pollination event because it's obviously not a Node meetup. Core contributor to Hapi, like I said, and I've used both Hapi and Express like for fun and profit. And that's how you can find me on the internet, on Twitter, and GitHub there. Okay, so before I get too far down this road, one thing, I've done this talk a couple times, one thing I tried very hard not to let it turn into is like a slam fest of either framework. Obviously, as sort of like Hapi's the one that I use the most, it would be easy and sort of conducive to me just talking trash on Express, but I really don't want to do that, and I shouldn't do that. They're both perfectly good frameworks, and there's really no reason not to use either of them. So most of my talk will be framed as just comparative, not really one being better than the other, until I get to the end. Okay, so who here has used Express? One, okay, a few. All right, cool. So basically, Express was introduced by TJ Holowaychuk and released in 2010. If you are unfamiliar with that name, it's unlikely that you are, but if you're unfamiliar with that name, TJ, when he was active in the Node community anyway, was one of the most prolific individuals in contributing to the Node ecosystem. A lot of stuff that he wrote still is used heavily today. Express is one of them, Mocha, the test framework, Stylus, the CSS preprocessor, and Jade is another one. There's actually too many, I can't even remember them all. But those are some of his other contributions, and Express was another one of them. So again, it was sort of like the first to market. There was a couple of other Node HTTP frameworks out there, but this one was the first that gained any sort of like mass market appeal. And again, it was kind of the first to market, so that's always really helpful if you're the first person to. So again, 2010, that's old in the Node world. That's like ancient history is 2010 in the Node world. So because of that, and it's been around so long, any like getting started with Node or how do I do blank with Node almost always says first install Express. So it's like it's the de facto HTTP framework. So TJ and some contributors, kept Express afloat, version 1, 2, and 3. But it started to stagnate a little bit around version 2. And, there wasn't commits constantly being happening on the GitHub page. There were issues that sort of stayed open and never got really resolved. It was around this time that TJ sort of started to throttle back greatly his contributions into Express. And, there's a lot of people out there who do open source, and that's sort of what they do. They allow initial effort, get something off the ground, and they're like, this is boring now, and then just sort of move on. So a lot of community members sort of stepped up and continued to act as stewards and keep the Express framework moving forward, sort of without TJ's input, really. So around that time, around version 2, and when TJ started to sort of throttle back and it became more of a community project, that's when there was a lot of drama. If you can believe an HTTP framework could have drama, it had drama. So TJ sold Express to StrongLoop in July of 2014. And even that in itself is a little confusing as to what exactly it means when you sell an open source framework. But ultimately what really was sold was the name and the domain. There's expressjs.com. It's a pretty documentation site. So that was sold to StrongLoop. During that transition, they gained control over the repo of the Express repo and brought it pretty much under their umbrella. Or no, they didn't do that. They left it under as Express. They left that part alone. But all the contributors who had been faithfully, diligently keeping Express functional and fixing bugs lost their commit rights. So basically, all the people who had been doing all the work just got completely cut out overnight without really any warning whatsoever. There was a really big, loud backlash about that, understandably. So one of the things that StrongLoop sort of tried to frame this purchase as now you've got a business corporation, you've got a full-time company who are going to throw full-time resources at Express to, do all the work that has sort of been lacking there. But they never did that. From July 2014, when they bought it, to March of 2016, there were less than 5 commits from StrongLoop employees, and none of them really were code changes. They were all just documentation and link tweaks. So then IBM purchased StrongLoop. So now IBM actually sort of owned Express for a while. And similar situation there. You'd expect a huge company to have put 10 people on it. I mean, it's a huge, very popular project. But again, similarly, IBM didn't really show any sort of real commitment to continuing sort of the legacy or the spirit of the project. And so then finally, once the Node Foundation was formed, it's basically, as I was saying in the beginning here, it's become such an integral part of Node that Express sort of is now under the Node Foundation, but still not completely clear what that's going to mean for the future of the project going forward. There's still a lot of contributors who are still quite salty about how the whole thing was managed. So there's a lot of grouchy Express contributors out there still. So I don't want to. I talked about TJ in the beginning. I'll just let this quote pretty much speak for itself. I'm not going to stand here and badmouth TJ, certainly. But if I have a couple open source projects, so if anybody wants to buy any of mine, I'd be glad to sell them, but it wouldn't be for half a month's pay. So of those core contributors that I mentioned, there's one in particular that deserves an extra shout out. His name is Doug Wilson, and he basically took the reins of Express basically for TJ, and has pretty much been running the project all but single-handedly. So if you use Express and it's in production, it's very likely he's fixed some bug that would have hit you or improved some performance bottleneck that would have caused you problems in production. So he's probably the guy that got the worst of it with the whole strong loop IBM thing, because he knew the project the best, and he was continually like kicked out and shut out of any sort of organized discussion about, hey, what are we going to do with this thing now that we own it, and how can we keep it moving forward? He's a good guy and really got a bum steer, as my rural upbringing will allow me to use that phrase. And so if you're interested in this type of stuff, there's a lot more to it, and it's even more bizarre than I've even presented here. So if you're interested in it, these are some links that go into it in a lot more detail than I have here. All right, so on the other side, Hapi was originally developed at Walmart Labs by Aaron Hammer and basically a small team that was around him. The first version was released in 2012, which was a good 2 years after Express. So there's that first to market thing. Really, the whole point of it was to address some of the shortcomings of Express. Some of them are less now than they were at the time. Some of them still are very present. So at Walmart Labs at the time, Aaron's team was all like distributed. Everybody worked from their house. And if you've ever worked on the Express server, it is really not conducive to not occupying the same physical space. It's very easy for somebody new, somebody who doesn't know the system very well, to put a piece of middleware in the wrong spot in the middleware stack, and that basically breaks your whole server. And if you're distributed, you can spend a whole day chasing that down because West Coast people are lazy and don't get up until like 12 o'clock for some reason. And there's 3 hours just out the window wasted with a broken server, and the person who configured it is still sleeping. So that was one thing that was the big key component of Hapi, was that need to be very friendly to distributed teams. Additionally, Express servers aren't like really composable, so it's possible, but it's not easy to take like some routes and features from an Express server you already wrote and like easily incorporate it into a new one. I mean, yeah, middleware sort of helps there, but it's not easy to like do whole features and whole like sub routes from one Express server to another. It's not very composable. It's better now, but it still isn't quite as powerful in that regard as Hapi is. So those were the couple of things. I'll touch on them more down the road, but those are the things that really sort of necessitated Hapi being created. In 2014, basically any legal claim or ownership of Hapi and all of its sort of sub-pieces ended. Aaron left, and Walmart at that time no longer had anyone on the payroll to continue to work on Hapi and its pieces. I was one of those people who was paid to work on Hapi and its pieces, so I know firsthand that they stopped doing that. But it is still used heavily inside Walmart. They just really don't have any sort of legal interest in it. And as of this writing, I had to update it this morning. It's on version 15.0.3 and started at 0.02 in 2012. So there's been a lot of releases. It has a very forward-thinking release cadence, and breaking changes are pretty frequent. Well, not pretty frequent. They're reasonably frequent, but it was one of the first major frameworks to like discontinue legacy support for the old versions of Node. When Node 4 came out, there was like a hard cut and said, okay, you're on legacy now. There's a new version. It only works on the newest versions of Node. My son's been sick, so therefore I've been sick. Yep, so version 15 is the latest version. Okay, so in terms of Hapi Drama, there really isn't any. It is a purely open source project. All the source code is freely available on GitHub, just like Express. One of the differences is that Aaron, I've talked to Aaron several times about it, and when he's done working on it or playing with it, he's just gonna like give it up and not really try to sell it. So it's just gonna continue to be like stewarded by the community. And there's already a couple people sort of like lining up to take over when Aaron gets bored and wants to do something else. So yeah, there's no, like I said, Walmart's sort of stake in it is gone, so there's no corporate backing. It's just a purely open source project. Additionally, another big difference in how sort of the project runs is it uses the benevolent dictator for life model, which, if you're not familiar with it, that basically means there's one person that runs the show. One person makes the decisions, looks at pull requests, decide what new features, if any, get in or not, and basically just acts as the dictator. That word obviously has some negative connotations for some reason, but the benevolent part sort of takes the edge off of it. And it's just another way to run a project where you don't get stuck in design by committee or a constant state of compromise. One person has a vision, and you build and work toward that one and singular vision. So that's another difference between Hapi and Express. Okay, so who here has used Hapi? No, not you. Okay. So here's some quick facts. Here's the elevator pitch version. So configuration centric. That's another big difference. If you ever build Express, which you end up writing a lot of code. Even like if you reuse some middleware, you still end up having to write a lot. So one of the sort of tenets of Hapi is configuration over code. If you think about it, that kind of makes sense. Every line of code you write is just one more place that there might be a bug. One more place you've got to write unit tests. So really, ideally, you'd write less code when possible. And that's sort of something that Hapi takes very, very seriously, where a lot of the common problems or common pitfalls or common patterns sort of just set up with configuration files and not, or with configuration settings, rather, without, you don't need to code those things again. Battle tested. As I said, Walmart uses Hapi. Let's see, was it, I think 1, maybe 2 years ago during Black Friday, Aaron was like tweeting, stats about all the node servers as they were being hammered during Walmart's Black Friday sales. And it was really boring because nothing really happened. Like nothing went down. There was no like scary looking spikes of memory or CPU usage. It was pretty much just a flat line with like little bumps from now once in a while when something cool went on sale. Additionally, there are other companies that use Hapi, Disney. There's some others that I'm privy to, but they don't want us talking about the fact that they use Hapi, but they're big. Another big one is has authentication and authorization like built into the framework. So all the hooks to like secure and authorize your resources are built in, already available. You just sort of have to tap into them and configure them. Whereas Express sort of leads you to your own devices as to how you want to work. Server. All the modules that live under the Hapi.js GitHub organization have 100% test coverage, like with unit tests. So every line, every branch of code has some sort of test against it. And that's, I don't know, something we're pretty proud of. It's a pain to maintain it, but it's a cool thing to tell people. And additionally, one of the, fancy word here, one of the one of the things that sort of helps you in evaluating a framework is how you expand it. How do you take it beyond what it was originally designed to do, or beyond its capacity, to sort of bend it to what you need it to do. Because it's rare you're going to get a framework, use it out of the box as is without any changes, and be able to actually solve like a business problem. That's extremely rare. So how you expand a framework is really important in evaluating selecting a framework. At least in my opinion, it is. And Hapi solves that problem with plugin architecture, which I'll show an example of later. But very, very simple. It hasn't changed since version 1. We're on version 15. So, like I said, it's very simple. It's a function that takes a Hapi server instance, some options, a callback. And that Hapi server instance that gets passed in is like a real Hapi server. It's not like a facade pattern or like a sandbox version of a server. It's like the whole server. So anything you can do with the server object, you can do in a plugin. So you can add routes, you can listen for events, you can create new sort of reply interfaces or response interfaces. You can create streaming database responders, everything that you could do with a normal server object. So about Express, for those of you who aren't familiar with Express, like I said, it's the most popular Node HTTP framework by like an order of magnitude. Whereas Hapi sort of tries to provide you like a complete framework to build a business-ready, scalable solution. Express is much more bare bones. It's much closer to core Node, and sort of leaves a lot of the important decisions up to you, to the developers, to make themselves. It has maintains strong ties to Connect and Sinatra, if you're familiar with either of those. So the rec-res next sort of function signature is, that's very common in like the signature that Express uses for all of its sort of middleware and response handling functions. Middleware is the primary building block. So that's like a function that can run on every request. And that can do all kinds of things like validate auth tokens, log. It can check to see if a cookie is valid and then redirect you. Otherwise, basically like a stack. And as a request comes in, it like executes middleware from top to bottom in order, and then whatever one of those middlewares responds, that's like the winner. That's the last one that gets executed, probably. This comes up a lot. It is technically faster in benchmarks because it doesn't do nearly as much for you. So a lot of the benchmarks you see are kind of stupid because they'll have like a single route that's not like you don't need any kind of authorization, and it'll respond with like a JSON blob, and they'll run like 100,000 requests against it. Well, how practical is that really? I mean, how many web servers out there just sit there with one route responding with a static JSON file? Not very many. That's not really a very good benchmark anyway, but it is faster. So depending on what you're doing, that might be a very important decision factor for you. There's a lot more resources because it's older and more popular. Therefore, there's a lot more blog posts, a lot more documentation. There's a lot more, here's how you do X with Express. And a lot more examples too. So if you're trying to learn it quickly, I would say it's a lot easier to sort of spin up quickly on Express versus Hapi. If you're doing like front end, if you're like a front end person, your tooling only exists in Express and doesn't have a Hapi counterpart yet. So there's a place you can contribute some open source if you're so compelled. So yeah, front end. There's some front end tooling that's pretty much specifics right now. Like the Webpack development server. If you've ever used Webpack, it's an Express server. The hot reloading middleware, again, only has an Express version. There are Hapi versions of it now, but they're not like official. They work fine, but the guy that does Webpack isn't going to maintain a Hapi plugin as well. There's also a lot of boilerplates and starter packs for Express that really don't exist or aren't as prevalent with Hapi. Oh, okay, we're at this part. Okay, so next up, I've got two servers that I wrote in Express, one in Express, and then one in with Hapi. Oh boy, that looks ugly. So I'm gonna start with the Express side, and I'm gonna start my servers. Okay, so basically, this is really boilerplatey Express. You create your Express app. I'm pretending I have like a real database, and I'm going to put some users in it. And go away. There we go. So I'm going to attach that to like a spot on the Express app. The body parser middleware, basically that just means that now this Express server can understand, posting a JSON body, and I've created a little logger middleware to show what Express middleware looks like if you want to write your own. And so then just a get request / query responds. This is how you get to the query object. This is a way to stream something back to the response, and then I've got a route to sort of sign up for this non-existent service, and then another piece of middleware at the end to sort of catch validation errors. So let's see, this was running on 9500. I'm going to use Postman just because it's quicker and a lot nicer to look at than a bunch of curl commands. Okay, 95. Okay, so if I run this, thank you. Somebody's paying attention. Yeah. What did I call it? Okay. So obviously it's hello defined. So if I do first name Adam, boy, I'm not doing too well here. So this is just an example of how you parse a query string. If I request the stream route, I create a file stream, or create a file read stream of package.json, and then as you can see, I do stream.pipe. I pipe directly into the res object because, like I said at the beginning, this incoming rec and res object is like the node HTTP objects. So they're streams, so you can stream, read and write to them like a regular node streams. This last route that is of interest is the sign up route. And I'm using something called celebrate here. One of the things that Hapi sort of has built into it, where Express does not, is like input validation. So again, you can configure any Hapi route to validate any input that comes into the system. So your query strings, your route parameters, your post body. You can also even set it up to validate your response to make sure that your response schema doesn't just change without anybody knowing. If you've ever done any front end work, I'm sure that never happens to you, but it has happened to me where the response has changed without sort of any warning. So there wasn't like a validation So Joy is like a Hapi module, and it's the validation module, and it's not really tied to Hapi at all. It just Hapi has hooks to talk to Joy validator, to Joy validation schemas. And if you've never used Joy, I would strongly encourage you to like check it out because it's really good. I don't feel like I ever really do it justice when I try to explain it, but it lets you like validate input in a very like declarative way that would otherwise require a lot of code. So for example, you're creating a sign up form like I am here, and you want to make sure that the name in the payload includes a name and it has to be a string, age, this is for mine, has to be a number, and an optional title attribute. And that's basic stuff, and you can pretty much get away with that with just some if statements and like basically any off-the-rack validation library. But where Joy really shines is you can, let's say you wanted to do like first name and last name or email. You'd have to probably write code to do that with a lot of other validation libraries, but with Joy you can express logical conditions like that, where these two fields are required unless this field is specified. You can also set up defaults. Has the normal complement of features that you'd expect, like regex validation and greater than, less than, et cetera. But the object against object keys is where it's really powerful. You can also set up validation rules for like unknown keys. So if you're expecting, first name, last name, and then additional like dynamic fields that the front end could send, just because they're dynamic doesn't mean you can't validate them. So you can set up validation rules for unknown keys as well. However, this didn't really exist for Express, so I had to build this. There were some versions, but they were all very old and weren't quite correct in some of their implementation details. So for example, this is what a Joy schema looks like. I just created it so I can share it between Express and Hapi, so I'm not like cheating and using one schema on one and a different schema for the other. So this is basically what it looks like, and it's very human readable. I mean, you don't need to know it at all to know basically what I'm asking for here. Both of those are required. Age needs to be an integer. Title is a string. Name and age are required. Again, this is very, very basic because I didn't want to throw like a super complicated one at you and scare you away from trying Joy, but strongly encourage you to try it. So basically, I'm validating the post body with this, and I'm going to try to look that person up in my fake database here. If they exist, we'll send back a 409, which I think is what? What's a 409? I forget. I picked it for a reason. I guess it's like forbidden or already in use or something. Otherwise, I'm going to store them in my local database and then basically send back a generic 200. So this is what sort of the validation looks like. So if I send it blank, nope. What is it? Sign in. Sign up. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So I get validation error, name is not allowed to be empty, and sort of a copy of the object I tried. That's without any code. So let's try it with just a name. So now we get age is required. I don't know, I'm just picking randomly. And so now, as you can see, we got a status code 200 back because all our validation rules pass. And now if I try again, that already exists in the database, and we get a response back. Conflict, that's what 409 stands for. I knew I picked it for a reason. And so we can try again with title. I wish I was the boss. And so that worked. I don't think I have this set right to work. So I did. So as you can see, I did not allow like unknown keys. I didn't allow any extra stuff. So the front end, the client tried to send, you know, some gibberish down the wire, and they got a 400 back immediately. Now what's interesting is because this is implemented as middleware, this doesn't even happen. The set immediate, none of that happens. So it basically short circuits the handler so that the code doesn't run if your inputs aren't valid. Now again, that's cool that it works that way, but I sort of had to build that to make it work that way in Express. And so this is the signature for sort of the building block of Express. This is what's known as middleware. So it's basically a function that expects rec res next, that very famous, familiar Express signature. You do whatever and then call next when you're done doing whatever. So if I flip back over to my terminal here, it was logging every time that it was getting a request for a resource that this server knows about. I should secure this route, but I don't because it would have been hard. And then here's our list of users. So one thing that is worth noting is that all those requests I was making, because I don't remember the own routes to my own server that weren't like, that were getting 404s, none of them were being logged. Like if you look back through this log here, none of those, like the request for sign in. Oh, no, it is there. All right, good. Oh, I guess I put it in. Yeah, that's why. So I put it, if you can see, I put it near the top of my Express server. Those app.use blocks, the order is important and that order matters. So if I would like move, that's like my request logger. If I would move that way down to the bottom, down here, and restart, and try to hit sign in again, it's still a 404. But that did work again. Huh. Whatever. Surprised that still works. Anyway, the order that you sort of put things in when you do app.use influences how they will function. And that's sort of one of the things that was frustrating. It still is frustrating if you're an Express user, that you kind of have to be aware of where you put different pieces of middleware, because where they are placed can impact how they function. So this is what basically the equivalent Hapi server looks like. We create a new server object, and again set up this fake, fake database. It's just a in-memory hash, and then this is what this is how you set up a route. Does the same thing. All the functionality is identical. This is what it looks like in the Hapi side. So every server has a configuration of a path, a method, and then a config object. And that config object is going to get very, very big because that's where like all the meat goes. So the thing that does response is called the handler. There's only ever one. Any route can only have one handler, and every route can only pretty much have one sort of response. Only one path that the code can go through for the most part. Again, you have access to the query via request.query, pretty much the same as Express. One thing to note about the handler is that you only get two parameters called request and reply. And unlike in Express, where rec or request is like the node HTTP request object, in Hapi, this incoming request object is like a higher order object. It is not the node native HTTP object. It's like a custom Hapi object. The core HTTP request is attached to it, but it's buried very down deep because you're not really supposed to interact with it directly. And the second argument, reply, is a function, but it's like an entire reply interface. So as you can see, I've invoked it, pretty much at every handler. I've invoked just reply and passed a value to it, but it has a lot of other things that you can do with it. So I pass a string here. In the stream one, as you can see, I'm passing a read stream directly into reply, and it's smart enough to know that this is a read stream, so turn around and pipe that right out as the response. You can also, there's also functions attached to reply, so you can do reply dot something. So it's a function, but it also has functions attached to it. So it's like this entire interface of sending responses, whereas with Express you get res.send and res.json. So I'm not going to show you an example, just trust me that it works. But as you can see, on Hapi, there's a validate object underneath the config object where I can say validate payload, and I just reuse the schema from the Express version. But I didn't have to write any custom code to make this work. I just configured the validation I wanted for this, and it works the exact same way. The handler function is not even going to get called unless all the validation rules check. So that's a big difference right there. It also, because of that, it really encourages developers to validate all inputs. I know JavaScript developers in general just are bad at that because it's a loosely typed language. So we're like, what's the point? It's going to break, it's going to break. But on an API, it's a little more pertinent to validate all your inputs. And being able to just configure them rather than having to write code every single time makes it a lot easier and a much less bitter pill to swallow, to be told you have to validate all your inputs. And so for these examples, I'm just validating the post body, but like I said, you can validate the route parameters, the query string, and the query string as well. Yeah, so that's the routing table. So like I said, for Hapi, in Express, middleware is sort of the building block, the coin of the realm, as it were. In Hapi, plugins are the composition method. And so here I've created just another logger plugin, and it looks like this. It's definitely a lot more verbose than the Express version, but yeah, it is what it is. It's more verbose than the Express version, but it's also more powerful. As you can see here, I'm doing like this server.ext on request. Express basically just leverages the existing node, like I said, streaming incoming requests and outgoing response stream objects. And they have a couple different events that they will emit throughout the life cycle of the stream. Hapi has like an entire other like higher order life cycle that you can tap into, like well beyond just like on start, on stop, on chunk, on end, the basic node stream events. So the server will emit like on request, which is what I've tapped into here, and that will fire every time there's an incoming request. And I've just logged the same information and then did reply.continue to say move on. Like I said, the incoming parameters are a Hapi server, any options that this take, which it doesn't take any, and then next, which gets called after you're done basically setting up whatever it is that you want this plugin to do. Another interesting thing is this attributes. I've got a version and a name keys set. I did beyond just like the npm version management and like dependency management, Hapi itself has its own sort of notion of dependency management. So if you build a plugin that I don't know, renders a view. You want to render a view that like says how much CPU and memory your Hapi server is using. you don't really want to write all that view logic again because there's already a perfectly good Hapi plugin for responding with, like a J template or a handlebars template. So rewriting all that would be counterproductive. So really, you want your plugin to depend on another plugin, where you can decorate your plugins and basically say, don't try to register mine with the Hapi server until this other one that I know I need is done registering. So that Hapi will then sort of build an internal dependency graph and then register plugins in the order in which they need to be registered in to function. So I didn't show that, but that's a really neat feature that Hapi has. Whereas Express, doesn't have that because there's no real notion of plugin dependencies. Does anybody have like any specific questions about the code before I switch back to the slides? You can ask questions at the end, but if you have any like code questions. No? Okay, cool. Okay, so it probably wasn't obvious just from looking at that code, some of this stuff, but so there, hopefully I've highlighted some. There's technical differences, even just looking at the code, there's technical differences between Hapi and Express. One of the biggest ones that trips people up and causes the most questions for new people to Hapi is the router. The router is very, very different in Hapi than it is compared to Express. In Express, you can have multiple routes with the same path. So you can have like 10, /home routes configured in your routing table with Express, and it will not have a problem with that. And that might be what you want, and it'll probably work fine for you. Hapi, on the other hand, doesn't let you do that. If you try to register duplicate routes, the server won't start. You'll get a big, mean red error saying there already exists a path for /home. Pick something else. So that's a big thing. It basically prevents collisions, and that allows you to basically look at the server, look at the route, and know with absolute confidence what's going to happen when a request comes in for that certain resource. Whereas if you allow duplicates, it's not quite as easy at a quick glance exactly what's going to happen if you've got multiple routes with the same path. The order matters. So again, Express allows duplication of paths, and whichever one comes first, whichever one shows up first in the routing table is the one that's going to win. Whereas with Hapi, since you can't collide, the order doesn't matter. And one of the things that's nice for is, again, distributed teams. You can sort of chunk it out into pieces. Everybody can work on their own piece. Build up, all their routes and plugins. Because remember, the plugins get a whole server object, so you can add routes and handlers to it. And then you just sort of compose them together, and you've got yourself a server. You don't have to worry about somebody stepping on your route. Or if they did, you'll find out immediately, and then you can have a fight, and one of you is going to have to change your routes. So yeah, some of the real uber fans of Hapi will say this, like non-deterministic routing table. Express has a non-deterministic routing table, which is just, I don't know, college person talk for you don't know by looking at it what resource is going to respond with what response, basically, just at a glance. So another big difference is how close to the core modules are these frameworks. So there's the actual names for them. Rec is http.incomingMessage, and res is http.serverResponse. And those are just objects available in the node core HTTP module that Express just decorates and adds a few things to. In Hapi, like I said, Hapi's request object is not that. It's like a higher order object created explicitly for Hapi, and it does have a handle to rec, but it's buried very deep, and the expectation is that most people will never need to dig that deep to get right down to the raw request object. And again, reply, that's like a whole interface with a function with sub pieces on it, and in Express it's just ending it's just sending the response. It doesn't have like this involved, complicated reply interface. When you use Express, you actually might have to load the HTTP and HTTPS modules, especially if you're going to do like HTTPS secured connections. Then you will almost certainly need to load both of those. Where Hapi, you don't need the core modules really for anything. And like I said before, Express leverages the core node stream events, so you can set up middleware to listen for like on stream end and start, just sort of like get a timestamp of how long a request took. And Hapi implements its own lifecycle. So the server has different lifecycle events that it will emit, but the incoming request also has like its own set of sort of events that it'll emit, like on pre-request, on pre-auth, post-auth, on pre-route, on post-validation. So there's a lot of different places that you can hook into to like interact with the incoming request and server object. A lot easier than sort of like the 5 node core stream events. Also, those stream events aren't like blocking, so you really can't even like stop something from happening. You can just sort of be notified that it has happened. So, Express bills itself as unopinionated, which it is. That is absolutely true. But being unopinionated is still kind of an opinion. Like saying I don't have an opinion is in and of itself an opinion. So basically, when you're evaluating the frameworks, what opinion do you like? Do you like being kind of hands-off and letting you go, or do you like sort of, here's pretty much how you are going to do it, and if you don't do it this way, then you'll be doing nothing? That's a comparison. Happy to Express. Extensibility, like I said, how do you expand it beyond its original designs? Express uses middleware. Hapi uses plugins. How do you solve common, HTTP server problems with each framework? With for auth, like I know how to do auth on a Hapi server, but how do you do auth on an Express server? There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. I don't know what is it? Passbook is the Apple thing. Passbook, I'm pretty sure, is like the de facto auth module for Express. But you don't have to use it. It's your choice. Whereas with Hapi, the auth system is sort of built in, and really the only way you can use it is to tap into it and just configure it. How do you do WebSockets? Again, Socket.io is the popular one, right? So that's one way you can do it. You can write it yourself. With Hapi, there's like a WebSocket module or a WebSocket plugin that you can just use, and that's like the canonical way of doing WebSockets with Hapi, is to just use the sort of blessed plugin to handle it. How much rope do you need to hang yourself with the framework? Sort of another opinion-based decision point. Express gives you, like I said, it's very hands-off, very unopinionated, gives you a lot of rope to hang yourself with. Hapi, on the other hand, is a very short rope and only lets you get so far off of how its opinion of how you should sort of do things before it sort of yanks you back and say, no, you can't do that. Or you get to a point where like, I want to do this, and you can't do it in Hapi. And the reason you can't do it is because it doesn't want you to do that. There's a reason that you can't do that. And at the end of the day, the reason often is just for security or to keep you from doing something stupid. So this is a question I get asked a lot. Anytime I talk about Hapi, people are like, what's the difference? Well, this is what that talk is about. The other question they ask is, how do you know which one to use? So I sort of sat down and thought about this, and these are sort of what I made up as how you can decide which one maybe you want to use. If you were just generating like a static JavaScript bundle with like Webpack or Rollup or Browserify, just use Express. It's, like I said, that front-end tooling is a lot more friendly to Express, and there's a lot more about it written for Express. If you're in a huge hurry, I would say use Express. It's a lot easier to learn. The API footprint is a lot smaller. And again, a lot more documentation and examples out there to get you started. If you're a front-end person and you have a bunch of like custom tooling, or there's like middleware for Express that you are just sure you cannot function without, just stick with Express. A lot of like the sort of niche specialized middleware doesn't have a counterpart for Hapi yet. If you have a iron-fisted ops team that like never lets you install new versions of things, or really hates NPM, then you should go with Express. Express is on version 4, I think. I don't know if it's even released yet, but it's either on 3 or 4, and it came out in 2010. Whereas Hapi is on version 15, and it gets updates pretty regularly. Use Express if security is kind of important. So if it's not like mission critical for security, then Express would be a good choice. Again, back to that, how much rope you want to hang yourself. If you like a lot of rope, then you should go with Express. If you like a lot of room for experimentation, and if if you're being paid by the hour, you want to spend a lot of time figuring things out, that's a good one to pick. If you're really into like researching modules and like figuring out which one's the best and which one serves your needs the most, then Express is probably a good choice because there's a lot of modules that do the same thing, just slightly differently or implemented differently. If you've got a small team or you don't work in the same physical space, then Express is probably a fine choice for your project. So maybe you want to use Hapi if you're building a RESTful API. That's originally what its intent was. Well, its intent was to build RESTful APIs. Obviously, you can do everything that you would need for like a regular website, but that's sort of like its sweet spot. If you have a large team, or you're distributed, or you have like a wide array of skills. So what's cool about the plugin system is you can break up a server into chunks, and you can give some of your junior people some of the easier stuff in one plugin, and give some of your senior folks some other parts of the server, and then just combine them later so that you don't step on each other, and both individuals can be productive without worrying about stepping on each other. I would use Hapi if security is really important. So if you're like a bank or a hospital or somebody who gets audited, then I would say use Hapi. The security is baked in, so it's far less likely that the developer will get it wrong. I'm not a security expert, and I actually only know 2. So I would not trust myself to write security or auth on a publicly facing, especially on a RESTful API, because I'd be scared I'd get it wrong. I would say use Hapi if you hate reinventing wheels. Like I said, a lot of code that you write in one Express server isn't easily transferred to another one. So again, if you just want to you pick something, get it off the shelf, plug it in, and move on to solving business problems. If you're interested in microservice architecture, we have a whole other talk about that topic, but there's 1 or 2 sort of blessed frameworks for taking Hapi servers and turning them into microservices. That's something you think is cool? if you ever had your Express server ruined because somebody put a piece of middleware in the wrong spot and you wasted all kinds of time trying to debug it, then maybe you want to try Hapi next time. If you're tired of having to deal with the HTTP request and response objects from core node and you want like a higher abstraction layer away from that, maybe you should try Hapi. If you're familiar with HTTP2 or Speedy and you want to use it right now, you can do it today with Hapi. You can't with Express, and it's basically going to require a complete rewrite of Express to support HTTP2 or Speedy. Anyone familiar with those two? Basically like a faster, sort of better protocol. That's sort of the future maybe someday, if anybody decides to ever implement it. So Hapi has a large, with regard to reinventing wheels, Hapi has a very large ecosystem of common things that you need to do to make a server successful. And because they're all within the Hapi organization, you can save some time by having to search for, you know, how do I do WebSockets? How do I respond with views? You can just go to the Hapi.js org, find the plugin that does it, load it up, use it, and move on to solving some real problems. Okay, so this is the end. So now I can say this. I personally do prefer Hapi. I don't know, I'm probably not doing a great job of hiding that, but I personally prefer Hapi. I think the plugin architecture is really cool, and anytime you talk to like a Hapi person, they'll like talk your ear off about that, which I probably already have. It's cool, it keeps things modular, you get a lot of reuse. Some people say that composition is the only way to like handle complexity. I don't know if I agree with that, but Hapi servers are very, very composable. So there's things that, you know, I've written for one server that I could just plug into a new one, and it worked perfectly fine. So yeah. So it encapsulates parts of the server. It keeps them from like bleeding across and causing problems. You keep cross chatter down to the minimum, so you don't end up with those middleware problems that I talked about earlier, where one piece ruins the whole server. And like I said, they're a way to deal with complexity, composition. Oh, this is the last slide. Okay, so that was my final thought. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yeah.
How can the Express put the logger down at the bottom? It won't log any of the routes that actually happen.
Yeah, but how come it was logging for the one?
Because it was bypassing routes.
Oh, yeah. All right, so I was right. It does matter. I just couldn't make it not work right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's confusing.
Yeah, because it's not deterministic. Yeah, so any other questions?
Wait, it's not.
Yeah.
It's really working.
Yeah, every time I'm like on the client and can't use Joy, it's really annoying because it's really good. All right, so if there's no other questions, I have shirts. I don't know if any of you have one still or yet, but they look like this, and I have a whole bunch of them, and it's just for the site. These are the last printings of this because they came from Walmart, and they're not really doing shirts anymore. So if you want one, come on up. Otherwise, have some pizza. Thanks.